Okay, I think we're back running. Okay,
Okay, so. This is showing us that we've got some gaps right now. This is on the input side of things. How many numbers that we have to start to work with. What really matters is on the output side, then this is what we start with. What can we get on a response? What does that look like? So that's what this next slide shows that over the last few years, over the last 5 years. Our. You get the next slide. Okay, there we go.
there we go. Sorry.
That for both the city and community department. Numbers have been trending down. This last year, went back and I just updated this. So one of the things when I met with the department last week, found a couple of glitches that the way the computer program siphoned some of this data out, there was some error in that. Because there were some gaps in some of the data, so went back and took a look at it. But on just the number of folks responding, though, there still is, it's just slightly trending down. Okay. And the only way to fix that, going back to what I said, is with the ISO talks about having a little bit higher number that, to try to get a higher response, you need more numbers to work with. So now it's kind of counterintuitive because we're just talking about it's difficult to do that. Okay, but my point is don't give up. Let's try that first, if we can. The people that you have are very dedicated. When I manually went through these numbers, I see a lot of the same folks that are there responding all the time. That's a lot. That's a big demand on them. So having some more could take a little bit of a cushion to that. But one of the things that I will say in this that it's still kind of not quite where we would like to see those numbers to be. And then the other thing is that this doesn't tell us the amount of time that it takes to assemble this full force to get to that number that we're looking for. And a lot of departments don't necessarily do this, and I'll show you in a little while what the NFPA standard, what we'd like to do, and then I'll show you what kind of the numbers that you're currently able to provide. Now, even one thing I want to point out on the community department side, that something that was initiated because these numbers are down and you're starting with a whole lot lower number. During daytime hours, the chief instituted called all calls. So essentially, all members of the city department are being paid as well. It isn't just restricted to community department members, just to try to get the response. So even with that being initiated, those numbers are still trending down. And the goal there was to try to get 10 or more responders per call. Last year in 2023, the average number of responders for city calls was 10.2. And in 2022, it had dropped down to about 8.4, I believe. So next. So as I said, there are certain standards that are out there that are benchmarks. These are goals. I can tell you that most departments, they're close, but nobody is perfect. But it's something to strive for. That's the target that you want to do. This is the ideal situation. That in urban areas, which they mean 1,000 people per square mile, it's recommended to have 15 personnel respond and be on scene in 9 minutes, 90% of the time. In suburban areas, that's more of what I would say the demographics and the population building characteristics here, other than like Main Street where the buildings are right next to each other. But otherwise, you're pretty much more fit the urban population standards is to get 10 people on scene in 10 minutes, 80% of the time is the goal to shoot for. Okay. Rural areas, they say 6 in 14 minutes. Why that's longer? Just because the response time. And the other thing is that because because of that extended response time, one of the more critical things is looking at more protecting exposures or adjacent buildings versus trying to confine it to a room or less. And not affecting buildings quite as much. So, actually, that, oh, it had brought up the old one. So there we go. All right. As I said, when I was meeting with the department going over this a couple of weeks ago, we looked at some of the response time, and actually this one, there's a little typo in it, actually 12 minutes, not 15, is that I found a little problem with how the computer was generating the reports when I went in and looked at individual calls. Sometimes either the 911 center or a run time was missed. The time of arrival didn't get put into the computer, so it skipped to the actually time that the units cleared the scene. So it looked like the response time was a whole lot longer than what it really was. So right now, the number is that 95% of the calls in the city are responded to in less than 12 minutes.
Did you review that number since our last meeting?
Yes, yeah, I went back in and looked at it because when talking with the firefighters, I thought, well, that seems like that's a really high number.
They were pretty defensive about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and rightfully so, you know, and they should be, because they're, you know, everybody's proud of, you know, the service that they provide. And one of the things you gotta remember that's part of this whole response time picture is that affects it a little bit on paying on calls. And there's two different numbers that we looked at here. Is one of them is the chief and assistant chief either go right from home to the scene, and those numbers are the first one on the report. So those numbers look a little bit better. What I'm most concerned about is what is the time that we get a fully staffed engine company on scene. And that's what these numbers are about. Okay, which, you know, it's good to have them there. They can do size up and some other things, but we need to put people there to start putting things into play. Okay, and when you see the response time maps, this is gonna make a little bit more sense, because where the station is currently located, very centralized in the city, the majority of your travel times, actually about 80%, 90% of them are under 5 minutes. Okay, so, but that also means the inverse of that for people to respond from home to the station. So if we add those two together, and this was the time I'm very impressed with, because even in staff stations, they want you to get out of the station within 2 minutes. So you guys are getting there and getting out the door once you're at the station in less than 2 minutes. Pretty impressive. You have to be in order to make this number work. Okay, so right now we're getting an engine out the door on scene 95% of the time in the city. That's for initial unit, excuse me, and then engine company is 85.7. Said that goal in NFPA 10 is 80% in 10 minutes. You're 2 minutes over, okay, but I would tell you, based on my experiences around the state, that's pretty good. Okay. The other thing is to think about, one of the things I talked about in the report is setting performance measures. Okay. And by that meaning, how are we gonna, you know, it isn't just a matter of saying, I think we're doing a good job. You need to put numbers to it so that you know and you can see some trends. Okay. This is a good number because obviously right now, and you can tell me, generally it appears by the survey too that we did, is people in the community are satisfied with the current level of response for fire. Okay, so we can keep that up, but if we can't, those are the things we have to watch, because it's going to be coming up where I'm going to say, here's some things you might want to consider having to do in the future. Doesn't mean you have to do them tomorrow or next year. What you need to do is establish, what is this performance measure you want? I suggest that somewhere right around here in that NFPA number. When you start not hitting it by 10, 15 more percent, that's when you need to start taking some other initiatives to change that. Okay, because a lot of people expect me to say, okay, in 3 years, you're gonna need to hire X number of people. Okay, what I like to say is that when this number drops down, that's when you need to add resources, not just this number. Also, how we're maintaining our numbers of paid on call people. There's multiple performance measures or goals that we have to be monitoring through this. That it's like when those things start slipping down, that's when you're gonna enact plan A, B, C, and D. And that plan, if you're gonna spend that money, is gonna move the needle. Okay, back to where you want it. So there's gotta be some reason to spend that money. And what are you going to get? What you're gonna get is get back to what are acceptable performance measures, okay?
Bernie.
Right now, it's not bad, but there are some things that I see that
Bernie.
indications that there could be some issues coming in the future. In the community department, the numbers for getting a staff engine on scene were 60% at 15 minutes. You gotta remember, a lot of that is travel time. Okay, is added in. And that falls fairly close to within the standard as well. Okay. Then you wonder, so it's like, what do the people in the community expect? And so we did a survey, and the majority of the people are in that, 8 to 10 minute range, which you're not too far off from that. And actually, as far as getting the at least one unit there, the chief officers there, they're getting there in that amount of time, and we get an engine there 93% of the time in that time range. As we gather right now. Okay. So one of the ways why that happens so well, whether it was whoever decided to put the fire station where it is, made a good decision. I find that to be quite common.
It was made Boston's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's in a good place. So ISO looks at distance versus time, insurance service office. So the distance on the top one is for in the city where the water system is within 1.5 miles, and that covers a little better than 90% of the municipal boundaries, just where you want to be. And when we look at the 5-mile service area, again, why you've got a favorable number is it's in a good location for covering the areas of the townships that are served by the department as well. Response time, we converted over, other than obviously the marsh causes a problem out there, because this isn't just do it as the crow flies. We use GIS, geographic information systems to produce this. It only follows the streets. Is that the top one is the 15-minute response time, and the bottom is the 5-minute response time. Again, most of the community is in there. Some of the areas where the borders are, there actually aren't roads in there, so it doesn't necessarily look as quite as friendly because of that. So where the station is right now is in a good place. But here's the downside of that. While it's in a good place, kind of outgrown the space that's there from a couple different perspectives. Very limited space for the apparatus and the support for the vehicles that you currently have. Some of the equipment is stored off-site. Some of it's seasonal that isn't kept there. Another thing is that there's no daytime quarters there. There's really no place for firefighters that hang around, spend some time. One of the things that I talk about in my report, that's a recruitment and retention thing. Okay, that there's twofold for changing the station. One of it is that eventually build it so that if you need to have full-time staff there, can do that. But there are benefits to having quarters there for that, is because stations that I see that have this when I go to visit there, and the people that are less than 30, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they hang around in the fire station. Okay. And what are they doing there? Some of the places, they've got video games for them. They've got food in the refrigerator. They can make a pizza. They can work out. They can do all those things. And there again, those are some of those perks that some people say, why do they get to do that? Because they're committing to be paid on call firefighters to the community. That is part of their benefit. I'm saying pull all the stops to try to make this happen. Okay, if possible. Okay, and what the cost is for doing that is pretty small compared to what it costs to pay full-time personnel. Okay, not saying you're gonna completely avoid that, you ever will, but you wanna maintain your paid on call staff, as many of them, and as long as possible. Another safety issue that is there, lack of showers and lockers for the safety of firefighters. And what this is that, when firefighters are exposed to the smoke that's there, it's loaded with carcinogens. And we don't want them bringing it home. The best practice for firefighters is that when they get back to the station after a fire, they've got a change of clothes there and they can take a shower, put clean clothes on and go home. The clothes they were wearing stays there in the firehouse and gets washed. Okay, some people don't believe that, but I can tell you, I teach classes on cancer prevention. And generally for firefighters, it's 4 times greater than the general population. Okay, not for a sad story, but I will tell you, it affected me. And four of the guys that I worked with close together, we've all had the same cancer. Okay. And I was genetically tested to make sure that it wasn't, you know, just something that was there, you know, it was. So why I say this is a good friend of mine, he always says if it's predictable, it's preventable. We know why, you know, I'm talking about Gordon Graham. And, you know, so we can do this. We don't have the ability to do that. Okay. The other thing is that it's unable to support future staffing models. By that, if and when a decision is made and the need that we have to put more people in the station 24 hours a day, you don't have the capabilities of doing that. Even sometimes there are stations that I know that aren't staffed full time, that when they've got bad weather and stuff like that, some people choose to stay in the station, you know, to boost response times. You don't have those options right now. Very, very minimal. A lot of things are compromised there right now. You just outgrown the space. So now going to looking at the 2 departments, that's our inputs, what we have, how the departments operate. What does it cost? And the city department overall budget, and I've condensed this down because it's kind of program budgeted. The total costs are found in several areas in it. So about 550,000, just under that a year. Now that doesn't include some of these costs here that I've listed out here that are covered by the city, that are held in other budget areas that the city is paying for, but doesn't include in the budget, like liability insurance, workers' compensation, property insurance, and legal fees. And a lot of those, the city is paying for it, but it's actually, again, benefited by both departments. So on the community department side, current budget, 72,875. And this is operational costs, this is without capital. Okay, and I said those gray highlighted areas are some of those that are, and these are not all of them, these are just some of the bigger areas that were captured. It's difficult to get every little piece because there's so much overlap between the 2 departments by having a lot of the same people and being in the same building. But they're definitely working on that with the city. So next. The other part is capital expenditures. So what we did is take a look back to 2019 and look forward to 2028. What the expenses were and are going to be probably during this time period. Some of the big ones in this, a big deal in it is apparatus and vehicle cost. Unfortunately, fire apparatus have skyrocketed in cost since COVID in the last 5 years. The price of a pumper truck and engine is just about double. And same with ladder trucks. Ladder truck, an engine that was $500,000-$600,000 in 2018 is now 1.2 million with a 2-year wait to get it. And when they give you that price, they say, subject to increases, which the latest one that I've heard, there's new emission standards coming out, so whoever ordered a truck last year is gonna pay another $47,000 this year because of what they did to emission standards for new vehicles. Same things on ladder trucks, so we're kind of stuck with some of those things. No matter what, turnout gear, everything that we do, the prices are going up. So what I really looked at in doing this is some of the efficiencies with the department. What stuff is duplicated between the two departments? What could we possibly, if they were brought together, not have to replace since you're in the same building? So that's where we're gonna go next when I talk about what can be saved by putting the two departments, excuse me, a little bit farther down, I jumped ahead, okay. So the next step in this process is just like, when we're looking at kind of starting from scratch a little bit with the department, what would it look like if we were designing it from, not just to do what it is right now, but designing it to do what we want it to do to these NFPA standards? Okay, how many people, how much equipment? What would the station look like? Kind of re-engineering it. So that's the approach that I took with putting together a plan or some potential merged budgets. And based on that, we looked at one of the big standards is NFPA 1720, which is a standard for operations for volunteer paid on call departments. They are combination departments, which is technically what you are because you have some full-time and some paid on call members. And then also Wisconsin SPS 314, which some people wonder where that comes in. They think it's just fire prevention, but there's actually a piece in there that talks about 2% dues money that you get money back to operate your fire department from the state. And they say in there that you have to guarantee us that you're gonna put 5 people on scene on every fire because it's 4 firefighters, one of which is not the chief. So that's pretty much telling you have to have 5 people. So there's a little bit of a standard actually in the state in order to get those funds. Okay, and that one's got teeth, the other one is a standard. So these are some of those performance measure type of things that we talk about in the report that NFPA 1720 says fire stations should be located to provide a travel time of less than 5 minutes in densely populated areas, 12 minutes in rural areas 80% of the time. Staffing model of the department shall assure that 4 personnel respond with a turnout time of 6 minutes or less from the time alarmed 90% of the time. Okay, a potential performance measure that I think it should put in place. Interestingly enough, when I went through the data, the average turnout time for members is just a little over 6 minutes. When we interviewed guys and asked them what they thought, majority thought it was around 6 minutes. So you guys had a pretty good estimate on it. High end, once in a while, a few of them might hit 9 here and there on like 2 in the morning or some other odd times, but the majority of times it's about 6 minutes, which is outstanding, I believe. Okay, so can we keep that up? So that's one of the things that we need to keep monitoring how well we're doing that. Another thing is that provide an effective response force of 15 personnel on scene at structured fires. Not every call is a structured fire. Okay, so the majority of calls can be handled by a single engine company. So that's why it's important looking at that number. Then also looking at structure fire. I can tell you, and I'm sure department members would too, is that they hold some judgment on, to a certain extent, what calls, how far out of the way they go to be able to make it. If it's a structure fire, I can tell you by the numbers, everybody tries pretty darn hard to get there because the numbers are higher for those based on an average type of call. That's not a bad thing because I'd rather see them, especially in employment situations, save their chips for the times that they're really needed or some of the other ones. Okay, so they get there when it counts. Okay, but you know, are we going to be able to keep doing that? That's a number that we have to continue to monitor. Minimum 6 personnel on scene in 10 minutes, 80% of the time, 15 total in the city, 6 personnel on scene, 14 minutes, 80% of the time in the rural districts. So these are my recommendations between 1720. And what you would put in place right now and use these as decision-making factors moving forward in the future if and when you need to make staffing changes. Rather than just somebody says, we need to hire 5 people. What's it gonna do? I don't make recommendations like that. If I'm gonna tell you that you're gonna do something, as I said earlier, it should, when put into place, it's gonna move the needle back to where you wanted it to be, if it's dropping that. So with that, I've got some different options to consider for changes for the future. This first one, the organizational options that I have here right now, these I would say are not things that should be waited to do. These are things that should really be looked at right now. The first option that's here, I don't recommend, but it's maintain separate community and city fire departments with some changes in staffing and continue with the same provision of emergency medical services. The advantage of doing this is that it continues the same practice that you've just been doing for years. Okay. And there is a little less administrative responsibility for the city. However, I found some issues in the governance and organization of the community department and how it is right now. That needs to be addressed as soon as possible. It technically is established as, in the state of Wisconsin, you have different options. Municipal, or one of them is a chapter 181 nonprofit corporation. Okay, so there are some things that are missing on what need to be done for that to be properly established as a chapter 181. Those need to be addressed ASAP. Okay, so that's not a choice regardless of what you do. Another disadvantage of it is that community engine needs to be replaced. City ladder truck needs to be replaced. There's 2 big costs there looked at separately. There's an increased cost, and because we're continuing to duplicating some of your resources. An increased administrative burden for the fire chief in the city. Some of those things are because we've got still have 2 separate departments. There are some things that aren't being done that need to be done. So it does not resolve employment authority conflicts. Here's another kind of odd thing, and these why I hire people like me to point out that I ask questions, you know. And so we have police and fire commission from the city. Okay. And then so 12 of the 14 people from the department are also employees of the community department. Who has ultimate authority? You're serving 2 different masters. You know, and we could say that's never going to happen. If one body decides to discipline and the other one does not, how do we resolve that conflict? That is a mess. I don't know of any legal precedents over that, but I'm sure they would be established, and it's not good. And you can avoid that. Predictable is preventable. Okay, it's difficult. It's a little messy. Okay, costs are not equitably shared. They said I've identified quite a few costs that are carried by the city that are not distributed out on the community departments right now. Legal and insurance gaps must be addressed, and that also goes back to number 1 with some of those governance issues that need to be addressed. Lacks efficiency. Both departments have to increase numbers of POC members to ensure adequate coverage. Okay, so I'm going to recommend that each of them would have to bring their numbers up if you're going to stay separate. One of the towns also would need to become the fiscal agent for the community department. Right now, the chief is kind of the fiscal agent for the department. So that's something that's going to need to get worked out through intergovernmental agreement. Going to be added burden for one of the communities is that you're going to have your town clerk is going to have to take over paying all the bills, payroll, all of those issues. separation of duties and other things that shouldn't be responsibility of the fire chief to do that. Staffing. I recommend that you increase the number of company officers to improve the availability that we bump it up to 3 captains and 3 lieutenants. And that also, this is primarily on the city side, but it works on both, is designate on call periods for captains to ensure that there's always an IC, other than chief officers. There's a lot of different ways that this can be done. Because right now, pretty much the way it is, just from my observations, the chief and the assistant chief physically have to be like out of country to not be on call. They're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Okay. That's not a good situation. They need a little bit of a break too. And also, in addition to that, get the officers more involved in the department on some of the administrative and support responsibilities. Ideally, to get those numbers up there and maintain it, a goal we should shoot for is to try to get our paid on call members up to 38. I know that sounds like a lot, that's 10 more than now. But that's a goal to shoot for. But we'll see if that could be done. Anything will help. If the departments remain separate, increase those members from the city department that are also assigned to the community department to 20. So there's an additional cost that's to do that, but it's again because we've shown that the trend for who we're getting on the community side of response keeps going down. And really, most of the time, we're having to rely on city department members to round that out, doing the all call. Okay. So the other thing that needs to be changes if the departments would remain separate, intergovernmental agreement needs to be developed by the towns outlining the establishment and organization of the department. Then one of the towns needs to be that fiscal agent. You're going to need to develop ordinances legally authorizing and recognizing the department. And the chief would have to be sworn in by each of the individual towns as well. Those are all part of the rules that are in there regarding chapter 181s. It's not quite as simple as it appears. Then also on the ordinance side, townships should develop a fire prevention ordinance that parallels that of the city. That also gives a little bit more ability for the fire inspectors to be able to enforce the rules from an ordinance perspective. Otherwise, you have to take it to the state level and you're not going to get much help there. So, and then the budget should be reviewed to ensure that costs are equitably distributed. These are the things that would need to take place just to maintain somewhat status quo. Okay. So it really isn't truly status quo, but status quo by 2 separate departments. My recommendation is that the 2 departments get merged. And it's provided by the city under contract to the towns. One of those reasons because one governmental body, one police and fire commission keeps things much more streamlined and straightforward. Advantages are single fire chief reporting to one government body, cost savings, equitable cost distribution, improved service levels. You got more firefighters to draw from the community department, one fire commission with authority over all personnel, decrease in training hours for community department members, avoidance of additional administrative burden for the townships because you would not have to then be one of you be the fiscal agent, the city would, and take care of paying the bills. You'd get one bill a year. Okay, or however you decide to make your payments. Disadvantages, it's going to be a little more workload for the city administration being fiscal agent in the merged department, increase in training hours for the current non-community members of the department. Okay, so the people that are on the city that aren't on the community or rural department now, and ultimately it's going to be up to the chief how they're going to do that, but you know, it may be kind of a balance in between, go to 3 nights, possibly a month rather than 4. Some would end up with a 3rd night. The people that are already on the community department would go down to 3 instead of 4. Okay, so that's organizational option 2. What does this cost? Okay. If we look at each department separately, this is also adding in or this is capital equipment costs, excuse me. Right now, we're looking on the community side over this 10-year period, 1.6 million for the city, 3.3 million. Which if we divide it out over a year, it's $167,000 a year for the community department, 331,640. If we merge the departments, we can save 1.3 million, and the cost avoidance is 132,590 per year. So the total cost for the merged department would be 366,700 per year, versus if we do it separately, it's, excuse me, 499,290. One of the big differences there is the cost of, I recommend that you would not replace that engine. And some of the other things is that now some of the other equipment is duplicated with that breathing apparatus, personal protective equipment. One of the things used to be thought like turnout gear, coats, boots, stuff like that. That's not very expensive, not anymore. How much did the last set cost that you had to buy, chief?
Between 4 to 5 grand.
$5 grand a person. So if we can avoid duplicating equipment as much as possible, that's my recommendation. So that's where the big savings are, primarily on the capital equipment side. Combined budget, if we look at them, and again, these are estimates, this isn't exact. Okay, is that current city with capital is about $872,000 a year. Once this engine would be put into place or replaced, the community budget would be about $250,000 a year. Combined, that's 990, or excuse, merged would be 990, separate would be 1.182 million. Okay, so by working together, money can be saved. As I said, it may not be necessarily that right now. A lot of it is this equipment replacement that's coming now and in the future, and also getting the staffing numbers and other costs distributed as they should be. Okay, so this is probably the number that, or area where people are most interested in. What does this look like? Okay, this is one of those times where working together saves some money. Next. Oops. So, as I said, this discussion, I know it started prior to COVID. So the what we used for the model of distributing the cost was numbers that were talked about during those discussions, which was dividing the cost up 25% of the budget based on municipalities' share of total population, 50% of the budget in proportion to municipalities' share of equalized value, and 25% based on actual usage on a number of calls that you respond to. So what that would look like, applying this funding models here, Town of Chester's, and again, these are estimates, 63,000, Town of Trenton, 60,000, Town of Waupun, 123, and City of Waupun, 436. This is an aggregate because we've added capital outlay into it. I know that's things that are open, how this is done, whether you borrow or whether you pay annually on it, those are things that can get worked out, but this is the aggregate cost, whether you just want to do it operationally and borrow for capital, you know, those are all things that have yet to be decided, but for illustration purposes, that's what was put together here. So that's the initial recommendation, what I believe should be done. Now looking to the future, what are our future steps that we have to do? As I said, establish these key performance measures, which I believe they should be no less than the performance level that you're providing right now. Then we would implement some of the next steps that I have for recommendations when levels are trending to fall below the goal by 5 to 10% or more. Okay, goal is no matter what, to try to maintain paid-on-call staff at the current level or greater. Okay. Then probably the next most reasonable step that usually is done when we can't meet these goals anymore. Daytime hours are the toughest to get people because of work situations and commuting, everything else is that you would have 3 full-time staff to cover with 1 engine. You'd have that plus the 2 full-time people that are there. So 5 people are on duty on weekdays from 7 AM to 5 PM. Weekend coverage, one of the things I recommend is, the first step to try is, if possible, use the paid on call staff. Everybody takes turns, we call it paid on premise. Rather than having more full-time, that they take a turn in the station. Okay, on weekends, if we need to have coverage on weekends as well. Okay, sometimes that can all be done at night. And again, why do I recommend that? Less costly. Are you gonna get people to do it? You know, that's the question. We'll see. But you can also open that up to other part-time staff. Okay, so then ultimately, the next step after that is 24-hour coverage, at least for 1 engine. Just so you know, that would take 12 full-time people to do that. Now, please, as you look at this right now, this isn't saying we're gonna do this next year. Okay, when do you implement this stuff? This is a plan that's in the back of your head that, or it's in the books here to look at, is like, what do we do when our performance levels start dropping with bullet? What are these next steps? Okay, and why say do it incrementally like this? A lot of it is try to be as realistic as I can about cost. And no matter what with this, none of these models that I have here are about being a 100% full-time career department. That'd be unbelievably expensive. Okay, it's a combination department. Why a full-time engine? Because probably about 80% of the calls can be handled by a single engine company. Okay, that's the reality. That's how, you know, because when you get into larger cities, not saying you're going to be like a big city, okay, but I was. Prior to this, that was my job. I was a chief in Oshkosh for 18 years. Majority of our calls were handled by single engine companies, but actually fewer people on it. Okay, the advantage why we could get away with that, because we had more of them to call on when we had to. Okay, that's why you need paid on calls. Because no matter what, when you have a structure fire, you're still going to need those big numbers there. Okay. Be too costly to try to have that many people for that few incidents, just not reasonable. Combination department, this is how many departments, and I think it's probably one of the most cost efficient designs really that are out there. So that's what I recommend for the future. So this is where I'm going to just stop for a little bit and open it up to questions about just the fire side before we move into the second half, which kind of addresses emergency medical services. Yes, sir.
Your numbers address people and equipment primarily. Did I miss, or don't you get into facilities, other than saying that it's inadequate? Because that's so important. If you're coming up with whatever number that you want to add for coverage.
That, would you need more than the facility that you have
Well,
right?
I know we don't
Yeah.
need, but
No.
you were not,
Right, you only need one station, I think right now is adequate. And probably will be for some time, but did I put a cost for that? No, there's a lot of different options on that are out there on what could be done. Okay, I'm not sure if that I answered your question regarding that.
well, I think it associates a number of personnel to equate to the current facility and what the needs are to accommodate that number of people.
Yeah, right now, there's no ability to accommodate any future 24-hour staff for any reason. But how would I design it? But at minimum, for any future design, should be that for the potential to be a 4-person engine company staffed in the station 24 hours a day.
Separate study,
Minimum.
separate study.
Yeah. Yeah, this wasn't a space needs study on the buildings, other than the fact that I can tell you that there's not enough room there right now. Really, even the training room was pretty limited for the number of people we put in. Yes,
This might be a silly question, but is it like an industry standard to wait until the performance measuring indicators drop to do something?
that's why I say, when you start seeing those trends, you know, that 10% is a lot. Okay, so, and I've talked with Kathy and Chief about this, that developing, you know, at least some of these, you don't necessarily see it like on a monthly basis, a lot of them at the most it's quarterly. More so, some of them more annually, looking at what is the trend, what direction are we going? Is it continually going down versus maintaining? And when you see that, that's when you start needing to make those plans and monitoring that it's time to enact one of these next steps. If something comes up when we're done with all this, by all means, I can go back and talk more about the fire side of things, but I promised the mayor that I wouldn't spend as much time tonight here, we'll keep it moving. So we also looked at another part of this study was looking at emergency medical services. And so the demand for ambulance service is increasing and community expectation for a service delivery are high. Rightfully so, but like, and why are ambulance service demands, EMS demands increasing? I could give you all kinds of reasons for that. One of them I just experienced myself, luckily I didn't have to call an ambulance, but my wife just had her knee replaced. Okay, 3 hours later, time for you to go home. Okay. Things have really changed, trends in how healthcare is delivered. And I challenge all of you that if you were in the hospital in either an ER or a discharge from day surgery or whatever, on the bottom of that sheet, it says, call 911 if you got any problems. We're the fail safe for a lot of things, and it's put on that in so many ways. The population is aging. Got a lot of folks in their homes, and I appreciate that, stay there as long as we can, but that puts a demand on EMS. Assisted living facilities put a demand on EMS. A lot, because they're assisted living, they're not skilled nursing care. So all of those things, those are a lot of changes that have taken place. Again, might necessarily like it, but those are reality. So call volume is much higher than it used to be. So with that, some of the problem is you're experiencing periods here in the city with no ambulance available for 911 calls. And then during those periods and looking at it, in the response area, the whole 200 square miles, there is often only one traceable 911 ambulance call during that time, which tells us that a lot of times there's only one ambulance available in your service area. Which then that causes delayed response. EMR service was added to address some of those service gaps. Okay, that was recognized that hey, we're having some delayed response times here. Complaints from the community that the mayor is aware of, city manager, fire chief, police definitely seeing that. Okay, so what was done was emergency medical responders was added in to close that gap. Okay. That isn't the only purpose for EMRs. EMRs aren't just there to get there fast. They're also there to provide additional assistance when the ambulance is there, because I just want you to think, and one of the people would ask me all the time, what does the fire truck always go with the ambulance? Because that's what we took in Oshkosh, is because houses, number one, are made for people to move about vertically, not horizontally. Okay, the other thing is that to provide good paramedic level care, you need more than just 2 sets of hands. Especially like in a cardiac arrest situation, many other things, that it takes more than 2 people to do that well. As my old battalion chief of EMS said, when you're in the race for life, you want a pit crew, not a mechanic working. Okay, so there's a value for EMRs, not just for that initial response. They're a critical piece of the system. For any type of EMS response, for the extra help. Okay, so demographic shifts are impacting delivery demands, and we talked about mental health, aging, traffic accidents, all those things. People call ambulances for things that they didn't in the past, I'll be honest, okay? But all that's adding up. So as cost increase, determining the most effective service delivery model must also be examined. So that's kind of what we took a look at here through this on some options that, again, that you have looking to the future. So in the current state of EMS, we have EMRs just in the city of Waupun, in the city limits only. They provide basic life support to the ambulance prior to arrival and assist with patient care and movement. Paramedic care and ambulance transport is provided by Lifestar Service under contract. So they don't do it 100% for free. You are paying them a subsidy right now to do that, 40-some thousand of which is provided by the county. Okay, so EMR is a relatively new service provided by the department. It was initiated in 2022. Some of the things that, while this was in there, more awareness came on monitoring response times and other things that you were more privy to some of the data and stuff that is out there. Okay, so 2022, there were 506 calls, 2023, 600. Even, I had to double check with the chief, it's 600 really even, yeah, so 600, okay, but that's a big increase, that's a lot of calls, and that's just in the city. Okay. So, to some extent, I'll just say it here, that you're also providing another somewhat of a subsidy to the ambulance service by providing this service. Because that, people don't look out the window to see who got there, they just know somebody got there, right? Okay, so they're happy someone's there. Survey question 5 that we sent out was, if you were a loved one or having a medical emergency, you called 911, how long do you think you should wait for an ambulance to arrive? 5 to 8 minutes was the overwhelming majority on there. Okay, and in this, I would say emergency medical service to arrive. Okay. So then looking at the calls for service, since the initiation of this report, the number of calls requiring mutual aid has increased in frequency. So the chart on the left shows the percentage of calls that EMRs arrive first on scene, and then we get over on the right, the little yellows on the top and the numbers there show the amount of times that it required a mutual aid response and ambulance from another community where there wasn't one available, and that does not count those times that the EMRs were on scene for an excessive period of time waiting for an ambulance from Lifestar where it came from within their system. By that I mean an ambulance potentially coming from one that was staging in Beaver Dam could come as far away from as Columbus or West Bend. Okay, that's not counting those. This is when there was absolutely zero available, and we knew for sure that mutual aid had to be called with most of the time Beaver Dam Fire Department, of which charges the city for their response, which is passed on to Lifestar. So in looking at this, that we have a situation here that, okay, we want to improve EMS service, then we also may need some potential assistance on fire to bolster our response. How do these two things work together? So there's some opportunities here. So one of the things is that if we would provide the service through the fire department. Would improve the availability of ambulances in the district by the system that we're showing. Has the potential then to improve response times. Gain local control over the service level because you as the elected officials here can dictate what the performance levels are and what the inputs are that are used. Okay. And it also has the potential to improve initial fire response because I would recommend that folks would be cross-trained as firefighters. So an option that we looked at, I always start with kind of like status quo. What can we do to leave things as they are? Okay, so the advantage of leaving things as they are is no additional expenses beyond negotiated fees for service with Lifestar. However, with that, it depends on what you set as a service level. Right now, heard a lot of dissatisfaction this, when an ambulance isn't available, that it's unacceptable. When we look at the contract and people say, we need to enforce the contract. The contract, when it's renewed, if it is, my recommendations that we've discussed would be much more restrictive than what it is right now. Would have higher performance levels set. Here's the problem with that, is that that's probably not gonna happen for free or at the same cost that there is. Okay, what is that number? We don't know for sure, but I was told when it was approached in the past where the city has said, we want you to guarantee that we have 2 ambulances here all the time. When this was done
I think 2018.
2018, somewhere around that, the number of $350,000 more was thrown out there. Okay, so it isn't, if we say, hey, just do more, that they're gonna have costs, so they're gonna wanna see something for that. Okay, so there would be additional expenses. So no unintended service gaps. What I mean by that is that here's one of the downsides of, they could say, we're done. We're okay. If you got plans or whatever we're gonna do, we're not gonna serve your city anymore. Okay. I can tell you that was an experience we had in the city of Oshkosh. That's how the fire department got. Okay, private provider said we're done. And at midnight, we were in the ambulance business. Okay, so focus on recruitment and training of fire department EMS personnel for the future. Could be done as an advantage rather than immediate. Possibility of improved interagency relationship. Hopefully, we need to improve the relationship with Lifestar. If we're gonna do this, need to share information more, needs to be more transparent. I had communication, or I shouldn't say me directly, my partners, initially good, but after that, our requests weren't necessarily responded to. Okay, which is what I've heard has happened. Okay, higher trained first responders, moving forward, trying to get more first responders trained, possibly up to the EMT level. Disadvantages, added administrative work as an ambulance provider, and this is if we would change that, okay, added expense for on-duty staff, coverage and response obligations that we have to do if we take it over, okay. Beyond that, negotiate an agreement for supplemental daytime coverage, possibly with Lifestar, and petition the state for approval. So one of the things is you already own 2 ambulances. Okay, one option is that's been kicked around is maybe we could just be their backup, and I'm gonna show you that's the next beyond status quo. Okay. That's gonna cost, okay, but you're still not gonna transport a lot, there's not gonna be a lot of revenue there. It requires a lower licensure level, would just be EMT. Limited call opportunities for generating revenue that I just discussed. Okay, so those are some of those future things that we looked at for the first option. So with this, what if we could supplement them with the ambulances that we've got by starting with an EMT ambulance, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. 7 days a week, and they would stay in place. If we did that, Obviously, we'd have that backup around why daytime hours, because that's the busiest time of day. Looked at the number of calls that happen at night and the number of times that more than one call comes in at the same time. And, you know, it's not a good number, but it's, it was about 30 times per year, I believe, that we, looked at it, where we have overlapping calls. Okay, so best way, use best bang for their buck is during daytime hours. Okay, we have more EMTs, so higher trained first responders. Theoretically, a better working relationship with Lifestar, because in order to do this, we would have to work that out with them to almost be co-licensed with them. Depending on what the state does. Stepping stone towards future levels of service. An increase, I can tell you, most recent city that I know of where this was the first step that they put into place. What ended up happening is that the private service kind of took a little bit of a breather and they just kept taking more and more calls. Because they were doing more interfacility transports. And interfacility transports, I'm talking about taking a patient from one hospital to another, and that is a big reality today too. That's a major change in healthcare. Okay, every hospital isn't, especially in the small areas, you know, in Oshkosh, we transported a lot of people down to Milwaukee, Green Bay, you know, where they provide certain procedures. That's just the way they operate now. Okay, so that's impacting things. Maintained paramedic coverage for the area a little better, additional cross-trained personnel available during daytime hours. 2 ambulances have already been secured by the city through grant funding. This is a concern that both a positive and a negative that I've heard through this process was, well, we bought these 2 ambulances already and we don't have a use for them or anything right now. I applaud you on the foresight for doing that. 2 reasons. Number one is, even with the potential for doing this, you've got the equipment and you saved a bunch of money. Otherwise, right now, if you ordered an ambulance, you'd be waiting 2 years to get one and you'd be paying a lot more. Okay, worst case scenario, you can turn around and sell them tomorrow for more than what you paid for. Okay, but you saw this opportunity and you took it. There's no harm, no foul for the city financially in doing this, quite the opposite. Okay, so there's no, it's one of those rare, no risk things that you did by doing that. But what you really did is you gave yourself the potential to get into providing ambulance service at a whole lot less cost. Okay, to the citizens. Disadvantage, add administrative work as an ambulance provider, just more work to do it. Besides just doing the calls, added expense to pay for on-duty staff, coverage and response obligations both during the day and 24/7. One of the things right now, the state says if you're gonna respond to 911 calls, you have to have a plan to go 24 hours a day. I'm recommending just daytime hours. One of the possibilities is negotiate working with Lifestar or petitioning the state to say, hey, let us just cover during the day. I'm not gonna promise that, but I can tell you that the state has become much more flexible in how they license ambulance services because of the crisis that I told you about earlier. That isn't too far away from you down in Dodge County in some areas. I know they're having some tough times too, that we heard about early in this process. Okay. So in order to do that, we'd have to negotiate an agreement for this supplemental coverage with Lifestar. It's a lower licensure level of ambulance staff, it's EMT. Okay, but with your transport times, particularly here in the city, and not overly concerned, limited transport opportunity to generate revenue. That's one of the tough ones, because you wouldn't be transporting a lot of patients. One of the things, not to say that that's why you get into EMS service, but the almost too good to be true thing comes from is there's a payer besides taxes. Okay, your health insurance, Medicare, Medicaid. Okay. So that helps offset the cost. So that's one option to put into place. The cost of doing that, we looked at this would just be for within the city, unless some of the outlying communities wanted to participate, is that the net cost for doing so and having, because it takes 4 people, and again, this is an estimated cost, is about $24.75 per capita. to provide this level. Okay. So keep that number in the back of your head for a little bit. Okay, so that's one option. Another option is to provide 24/7 paramedic ambulance service with an EMT backup 7 to 7 during the day. Again, why just during the day is because that's when the majority of calls are, less likelihood that we're gonna have more than one call. And at night, that second call can be covered in a variety of ways. Because we already have EMRs, if you're the ambulance provider, just not to get into a whole lot of detail, but you could be on one call and once the EMRs are there, you could cut one of the paramedics loose, work with an EMR and you can staff an ambulance. The second one, it's legal to do that. You also have some of the people in the EMR group that are already licensed at the paramedic and EMT level. Okay, so there's a lot of audibles that could be called for when we have that second call that happens after 7 p.m. at night. Okay, little less costly to do it this way rather than 2 crews 24 hours a day. Okay, improves availability of ambulance for 911 calls. Highest level of medical care, paramedic level for pre-hospital. You have full local control of the system. Positive thing on this one is the revenue stream that comes with it, because now you get the bill for those calls that you're responding to. Unfortunately, the way the systems are set up right now is nothing goes to first responders, nothing goes unless you transport. You can bill for transport, Medicare, Medicaid won't pay. Okay, some insurance companies might. Okay. Improved availability and reliability, decreases in response times. Fixing those problems that you have now. 2 ambulances have already been secured by the city through grant funding. It is less costly to implement and sustain than the other option that I showed you because of the transport traffic. So it's more costly than the current system potentially, but that's as it is right now. I don't know what that, it's, you know, and a lot of people have said, well, let's just make it a more restrictive contract with Lifestar, okay? And I would say, check that out, see what they say. Okay, almost from an RFP perspective, look at this compared to that. What do they want to do it? Okay, can they do it for this, or is it gonna be more? Add administrative work as an ambulance provider, competition for trained responders, as I said earlier. Getting personnel, employing folks. Police chief and I were talking about that. Everybody's in the same boat, hiring people. It doesn't just paid on call, it's full-time staff or whatever. But one of the options with this one, what I like is the EMT side of it. There's a little bit easier to be able to get right now. Paramedics is the real tough one. Okay. Increased training and education. And then to ensure 2 ambulances are in service at all times, a 3rd ambulance would be needed for instance of maintenance and repair. Since you're relying on having 2, you need a mechanical spare to put into place for when one's in getting oil changed, broke down, whatever it might be. This is one of those things that I've talked to Kathy about, is that before I would do that, I would talk to your neighbors that are also municipal ambulance providers and see how we can share a piece of apparatus between communities. Okay. I think that's something that's going to be done a whole lot more in the future, particularly with fire apparatus too. I'll plant that seed right now. It's getting to be too expensive for us to all have a full depth fleet and reserves. So, an option, to this, option 3 and 3B, and it is, additional advantages, sorry, is that we could have cross-trained as fire personnel staff for fire response. The question comes in that, well, we can't use them for both when we have a fire, and that's true. Okay, I've already talked to the chief when I worked in a system where we did this. We were paramedics and we were firefighters. Okay, that the ambulance would be available on scene, but not necessarily committed inside the building, but can help out when they first get there. So one ambulance for sure would have to be set aside to do that, but it's still two more people that you put on scene. And the other one could be possibly engaged in that. That's not gonna mean that you don't need your paid on call folks, that's just a start, okay? But they might be able to be there and could perform something, a ladder rescue if needed be, put water on an exposure, get a hydrant connected, some hose lines laid out, it all saves time, it's a game of minutes. Okay. So we would cross-train those folks to be able to do that, improve availability and reliability in the system. That's probably the most important thing in all of this, okay, is that. Okay, so that's the first option then, and what would that cost? Okay, it's not cheap. Okay, because we're looking at full-time personnel, and again, this is an estimate. So, and when we're doing this one, we're looking at the entire territory, not just the city of Waupun. Okay. This would be covering all of those within the ambulance district that currently is responded by Lifestar. Looking at the number of calls that, based on information that we were provided, okay? And one of the things is that, and some people might look on this and say, if you had an ambulance bill in the last year, you'll say, it was a whole lot more than that, okay? Probably well north of $1,000, okay? But roughly, you're gonna collect about a little over 50%. We stayed on the conservative side, okay? On what you're gonna be able to collect. Okay, so on that, so with the revenue in the district, potentially as much as $843,000. If you did all of the calls. That includes calls to the correction facilities, care facilities, no transports, really don't get anything for that, but it's the 911 calls plus that. By care facilities, why some of those depends on, they sometimes do private call right now or go direct to Lifestar, so it doesn't necessarily always show up in the calls that the first responders are currently getting. Okay. So that's the revenue of it. The cost. Of doing this is, our estimate is around $896,000 a year. Which would leave a net cost of $262,000 and about $14.58 a person. Which is more than what you're paying right now, but even less than just providing that backup. That's out there. This is one of those, how can that be true? It seems too good to be true. It's because there's revenue associated with it. Again, this is estimate, best estimate based on the data that we were given from transports that we had from Lifestar. Okay, this is for this model. We also looked at it, what if we would just run the whole thing 24 hours a day with 2 ambulances in the station? That would be 4 people in a station, 1 paramedic ambulance, 1 EMT ambulance. That is option 3B that we'll show you next.
There's not cooperating.
And this one, it jumps it up to 1765. Okay, to keep that running 24/7. I would say start with 3A and then move on to the other one, see how that goes. It wouldn't be a real difficult of a shift to do that, to add more personnel, especially at the EMT level. The other thing is that, well, if one ambulance is EMT and the other one is paramedic, how do you do that? Calls are screened by the 911 center, A through E. C, D, and E calls are the ones that probably require advanced life support and paramedics. A and B do not. EMT ambulance would go to those calls. Be the first ones to get sent to it all the time, and then that would keep the paramedic ambulance in a reserve. Not that they wouldn't, when a second call comes in, go to those A and B calls, but that keeps them more available for those higher acuity calls when they come. So there's a lot of little options that we can do on seeing, I call them calling audibles, you know, like we do in football with the first responders to move around and free people up to make that happen. Cause they're all in your system, under your control, you can do those kind of things. So distributed throughout that whole population of the district, that's what it would be. And this is roughly based on our population estimates, what it would cost the individual towns. Okay, so in the city, $196,000, and some of the towns don't have a large area on it, but the greatest is Village of Oakfield at 18,000, so somewhere between $10,000 to $18,000 a year per community is our estimate. Questions? Yes, sir.
The operating costs on the previous slides, what goes into that, like I'm saying, this is the increased cost of the training, the increased cost for the officers if they're gonna be wearing dual roles. Is that part of that, or isn't that part of this slide?
That is part of it. On the cost is all their benefits, health insurance, Wisconsin retirement system, overtime. One of the things with firefighters that's a little different, that's a benefit to a certain extent, is they don't get overtime until they hit 53 hours a week. So there's some time built into that. This is an overtime schedule that you actually work 56, so there's overtime already built into it. So this is an estimate based off of all of those personnel costs for that. And then also some operating costs for supplies that you're gonna have to do, and sick time, paid leave time, our best estimate on what those would be for that.
So with a system like number three that you had, was there increased liability insurance and stuff that would go along with that when you're running those types of units?
On the operational cost, we try to build that into.
Dan?
On the 14, you said cost per capita $14 and change, now that's 58 cents. But does that include what would likely be millions of dollars to renovate or rebuild the safety building?
No, it does not.
Would you like to make a broader point?
Well, that number is accurate to run that program that's up there. It doesn't encompass the whole program when you have to house those people. They have to live somewhere when they're working.
Yeah,
That's fair. And another thing that I learned today too, so the city of Beaver Dam runs 3 ambulances through their fire department. And they had to stop doing the inter-facility transfers because they're just too busy to do it. So that profit we can start with that profit mode, the business model, but over time this does change. It's a snapshot in time, it's just.
this is not doing the hospital stuff.
Okay.
Just, and that you can say nursing home is that 911 call or not, I don't know, but those are in there, but taking someone from the hospital here to Fond du Lac or to Madison, those numbers I didn't include here. You could do it, I don't recommend doing that because as you said, the demand for that, we did do that in Oshkosh, but stopped doing it just because demand was, outstripped the supply and left that to the private services to do that.
A couple weeks ago, you had mentioned when we met that Lifestar has their agreement with the city is within 5 to 8 minutes that they are responding 90% of the time to those calls. And with the increased mutual aid calls or additional help from surrounding paramedics, that's being met, is that not? It's still being met at the 90%.
Yeah, and that's why I said, moving forward to the future, why I would say the community doesn't seem to believe that's acceptable performance, that I would recommend changing the performance levels of the contract to say, if anything, not those numbers are that we want 2 dedicated ambulances for 911 calls in the city.
It would help if Lifestar was a little more open with us too, like when there isn't an ambulance available. We talked about that 2 weeks ago, isn't it?
And that's why I said, find out what, say, if this is our expectation, what would that cost? You know, it's only fair to take a look at that moving forward, you know, but. You know, if you can do it for less and have some additional advantages by doing so. You know, which a lot of times they'll tell you it seems to be the case. It isn't, there's a reason why a lot of fire departments provide emergency medical service transport. Yes, sir.
Model you had where which each township is gonna pay a certain amount. You know, in guesstimate, is that whether you go there, excuse me, 20 times a year or 5 times a year, that's the same amount?
This was strictly divided up for. Now, ultimately, whatever decisions to make, how you're gonna do that by contract, right now, that's how it's done, like per capita. I see most places do it that way. Some do it demand based by number of calls and cost. So that's open to negotiation. I would,
Does that count as a call against the township for the I'm just talking paramedic? For if there's an accident on a highway that is in that township? So does that call go against the township then?
in the contracts that I worked out, yes. Okay,
How does that, he actually, I was asked this question, and Dan, I wanna piggyback. So if there's a car accident on 151 in the town of Chester, and we respond to it, who gets, like, do we bill anyone for that, or?
The way it's currently set up, if the individual resides somewhere within the coverage area, they do not get a bill.
Okay,
If they do not, then we can bill. We have to show that we tried to bill them 3 times. If it's on a state highway and they still do not pay, then we have the opportunity to submit a form to the state and get a $500 reimbursement from the state that way.
okay.
and only townships have that option. Cities and villages do not. Yes,
That was one question I thought of, so EMS brings in revenue. Fire does not, is that standard across the state?
that's pretty standard across the state. And one of the other things is, and this was taken care of by, I believe, Act 20 a few years ago, is that a lot of municipal services they were looking at, because shared revenue got flattened out, is that charges were starting to be done by municipalities, and they said, you can charge for stuff, but you're gonna deduct that from your operating budget when you do it. So it's kind of a zero-sum game when you do it. So the state, you can, but you don't gain anything by doing it.
But if you run EMS, then you do gain some.
Yes.
Town chairman, guys, anything to, like, it's a lot of, this is my second time.
one time.
It's my second time through, it's a lot of stuff, like, you can
So-
take time.
The detail is in the report. This is just a big general overview. And things are broken down a little more fine, and Kathy will be sharing that.
We'll be putting it on our website, and we can send you a link, but it's, prepare yourself, because it's about 100
Yeah,
pages or so.
It's long, there's a lot of information
I
there.
figured you'd
It's
want
a
to
lot,
read it
but-
before coming into this.
either.
No, sorry,
What the
you
doc-
know, reading your
Yeah.
report, but. You know, but as the way it's kind of designed out is, it's like, this is your state of the situation here right now, and then these are your options, and this is what these options cost, and what it's gonna get you.
Any other questions? Well, I thank you all for coming in tonight, and I guess with that, we'll, anything to add,
So
Kathy?
I'll just say, thank you, Tim. We've been working on this for quite some time. And he has been nothing but responsive to questions, and trying to look at data in different forms. I think it was very important. We set out to really understand what the roadmap could look like. And I think we have a roadmap that's laid out. We have to make sure that we're measuring, and really trying to establish what happens next. And so I think we can do that from what's here. And the council will next be talking about this on the last meeting of May, which I think is the 28th. I don't have a calendar in front of me. Like what's the so what, we'll be trying to leave this with the town chairman. Because there's lots of things we need to try and address immediately to more intimacy. There's plenty of conversation about it, so we're gonna keep working on this. You know, in no way is the city in a position to just add this to the tax bill. We are at our levy limit, and that's a fact. So we have to work collaboratively with the community and figure out what's the community want and say is important and figure out how we're gonna get there. So a lot more conversation to come is what I would say.
Dan, can we make any comments?
Sure.
Okay, I got two quick comments. I'm gonna add to what Kathy said. We attended a Dodge County forum, was it 6 months ago? Ish.
Yeah,
And the flavor in Dodge County is to convert all the fire departments to county. And we're opposed to that, big time. So we want to control our own destiny here, that we feel that's critical. So that's why we made the decision to bring in consulting. The second thing I'd like to do with the mayor's permission is I think it's appropriate to recognize everybody in the room that served on police or fire or EMS at any time. I'd like to ask you to stand up. I think there's.
Well, not you, Dan. No.
Please.
Oh, jeez.
And one of the big takeaways tonight, and I think you pointed this out several times, is our response rates are awesome. In our current state, and that's due to what you guys do, and it's greatly appreciated. So, thank you.
That's a really good point, Dan, because the first time we went through this, I forget what, and he didn't do anything wrong, but there was something in the data that showed the fire department response rate was a little off. And these guys took it pretty personally,
Oh,
and it's
absolutely.
cool that our volunteer firefighters care that much, so.
And my ask is that, can we correct that slide to 12 minutes? Under-
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
15.
yeah, we
I
got
think
a
it'd be
couple
great
things
if
we're
that
gonna
corrected.
correct.
For the record,
Mhm.
and what I look at is, our goal is to, and what we're charged with is to look ahead, right?
Mhm.
Where are we heading? And this gives us a pretty good, at least to make decisions, it gives us some really good data, but the really cool part about this is when you look at where we're at. And that's, again, due to what you guys do, and it's very much appreciated, so.
And understaffed.
Yeah,
Right
yeah,
now, correct.
we're, and then the shingle's out, if I'm not mistaken, right? We're hiring.
The shingle is out, it's on Facebook every day, yeah, right.
So,
And
so
Yeah,
like
and it
that's
is,
an important
and-
part,
and I'll-
point.
give you that picture again, what is it gonna take to change that, more than what you're doing right now? And also in this, not just looking at folks that you're bringing on, we've had some discussions about, you know, compensation for the current staff. And that, you know, there needs to be more of a spread for responsibilities between the officers and the other members and things, so. You know, we're not gonna negotiate that in public, but those were
I
things
got
that.
2 notes for recruiting and more perks. That's what I heard, BJ. Like a ladder truck to climb all of them.
But to the current staffing
I called my
level,
senator today for money.
to be really clear. So we're authorized for 28. A year ago, we did try to go to 33. We never got to 28. This recruiting thing, and Jeremy can tell you, and so can I. If you think about the demographic mix, we don't have anyone under roughly 35 years of age. And I'm sure you guys can tell us that you're not gonna do this job forever, physically, right? It's gonna be a challenge, so we gotta solve for the young people, right? And how do we encourage them to come into these roles? Because if we don't, in 10 years, this is not gonna look good. And we better start addressing it now. That's what I know. 10 years in workforce development, I can tell you the picture isn't gonna get better. The head count's not there. Our school enrollment's been declining. It takes 20 years, right? At the time I was on the school board, we're 24 years into a working adult at this point. And the enrollment's been declining the whole time or flattening out because we added 4K. So the population to replace what's leaving, it's not there. And we're gonna have to get really smart and aggressive about it, and we're gonna face some real headwinds. That's my projection on this, so. You know, we gotta give ourselves permission to try and solve for the problem, and that means hard conversations. But transparency and trying to like get everybody's input is gonna be a really important part of the process.
That's a really important point. We haven't made any final decisions and we're doing this as open as possible. Yes, sir.
Kathy's 100% right on the recruitment. We gotta get back ahead of the curve on recruitment as far as the old school way of recruiting and, you know, hey, do you know a buddy or something. I mean, that just doesn't work. And even the Facebook posts, you know how many high school kids, there's not very many high school kids on Facebook, like it's.
They say we're old people now.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's just a matter, and you look at the slide that Tim had where it
Old
showed,
people like
you know, those two younger groups where we have nobody. Those are the people, they can be firefighters for 30 years. I got on, I can't be a firefighter for 30 years.
Oh, I
don't
know.
work.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm in incredible shape, but I'm just saying.
I'm not questioning that, but.
Calendar.
The department has done a good job. When you look at the age of the members and the years of service, you've recruited outside of just young people, which is good, and you gotta think, it doesn't matter, as long as people are capable, so you're doing that, which is a good thing. So, but it's still stay ahead of the curve, and you know, and through this, in discussions that what keeps fire chiefs up at night is maintaining this level of service, that when not somebody calls 911, people have an expectation. And you've got to be prepared, and your responsibility is to be able to deliver that. You keep monitoring where you're at. Said, if we can fix it, there's multiple ways of doing it. And I like to always like to present options. If this isn't gonna work, what's that next step that you're gonna do? That you're gonna lay out here in, you know, sometimes it's difficult, you know, for current city staff sometimes to keep, you know, it sounds like they're making that ask that I can come up and objectively say, hey, they're reasonable and you know what the concerns are. So two things that I forgot to mention. One of them, when you pointed out the police chief, under the EMRs, one of the things that was shared with me from the police was by putting the EMRs in place, help them also, and they're stretched. I mean, police calls are through the roof too, so that takes some of the pressure off of them because they were doing it on top of, and they're still responding, but they're not committed to patient care. Safety wise, we gotta have around, you know, for a lot of the calls we're going to in today's world, but they've got a lot of calls they've gotta deal with in the community too. So I just, that was one of the things that one pointed out that helped with. The other thing that just a comment on the county level, and heading down to another community, 2 communities on Thursday, and there's discussions that had took place like that there. And they asked me my opinions on that, and I just said, if that would make sense to do it at the county level, but I don't think you want to jump to one artificial border and one bigger one just because. If it makes sense, I look at what makes more sense from a region versus to say it's got to be done in the county, because there's a county where there's a concentration of population on the southwest corner of it, and then there's not through the rest of and it just doesn't make sense for them to be contiguous, at least not all of the departments under one, maybe broken up into several. And that was Ozaki County took a look at that too, and they even said it wasn't necessarily county-wide, that it's like maybe these 3 departments should work together and these 3 or 4 over here. So, you know, I'm not saying that it's not, you know, I don't, you know, there, but I'm glad that you didn't just jump in and do that, because I don't know that that's necessarily the answer. Do I believe in the future that we're gonna have to work together more single fire departments? I will plant that seed with you, because the reality is it's kind of that way with mutual aid already. When there's a structure fire, we respond multiple departments there. What we really need to be looking at is beginning with the end in mind. Let's design the system to produce what we end up having to do. You know, and I think what I've shown you here does start setting things up to keep going in that direction. And my last thing, so that Mayor doesn't clobber.
You're pushing it, you're.
Taking going time. On behalf of Public Administration Associates, I thank you for giving us this opportunity to help you out and we'll continue, you know, as much as I can to help Chief out with any questions and as you move forward to try to make this happen. You know,
You're good.
Yeah, I would say if there are any additional questions that come up, if you've had an opportunity to process some of the information, let me know. I can always work with Tim to try and better understand if it's a specific number or how they came to a data point. More than willing to help with that process.
you said a lot of these costs are general estimates. We didn't drill it down into the final detail yet. Things are open to negotiation. You know, and other things throughout the process, but it's in the law.
All right, well, thank you all for coming. Hey, Dan.
Yeah.